Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ankit Rajiv Jindal. I'm a marketing advisor at NTT Data Services. I'm 95% blind, and I'm also, apart from my role at the corporate, I've also been involved in the disability sector, where I've been part of the policy making, a part of the committee that reviewed the RPWD Act before it was enacted. So today I have a fairly packed agenda. I'm going to talk to you about the new RPWD Act. What are the 10 things that corporates need to be aware of while you're embracing disability and inclusion? And I'm also going to talk about the journey of NTT data and some of the best practices that we have incorporated. Is this slide on? Okay. Point number one. RPWD Act is not the only legislation in the country for people with disabilities. However, this particular law has the maximum implication for the private sector. Now, there was a law before Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. It was called the Persons with Disabilities Act of 1995, which got repealed. There is also the National Trust Act, which focused on 4 major types of multiple disabilities, including autism, cerebral palsy, and others. There is also the Mental Healthcare Act of 2017, which talks about providing mental healthcare facilities. And we also have the Rehabilitation Council of India Act. RPWD Act was passed because of the UNCRPD. India had ratified something called UNCRPD, which is United Nations Convention for Rights of People with Disability. It's an international treaty which underlines several provisions on how a country, how companies, and how really the disability inclusion must be incorporated. India was one of the first few countries which ratified it, and as a result of which we had then repealed the old PwDs Act and created a new law, which is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Point number 2, next slide. Rights of Persons with Disability Act has given a new and expanded definition of disability. It takes its inspiration on social model of disability. Disability for most of us is a limitation or an impairment of a body part. So I cannot see because there's a problem with my eyes. I cannot hear because there's a problem with my ears. But truly, today there's an expanded understanding as far as disability is concerned globally. Today we talked about that disability is not only about one's own personal impairment, but it is also about the barriers that exist in the environment. So let me give you an example. Today we are having this event in a very accessible place. Trident is a fairly accessible sign language interpreter, thank you ma'am, and I've been provided as a volunteer. But what if this place was not really very accessible, it did not have the ramps and buildings? So a person on a wheelchair or who uses wheelchair who wanted to have participated, but because the environment was not accessible, he would have encountered disability. Similarly, for a person who is blind, if I want to consume content, and the content is not accessible to my screen readers, it is then I experience disability. It's not because I'm only disabled, it is when I experience disability. So a lot, the onus today has expanded. It has moved from purely a medical model to a physical model. And mind you, there are 21 types of disabilities which are being recognized in the new RPWD Act. This includes your conventional disabilities like seeing, hearing disabilities, orthopedic impairment, but there are also new conditions like blood-related disorders, chronic neurological conditions, hemophilia, thalassemia, and many others. So, really, there is an expanded, there is also a little more nuance as far as disability is concerned. The law describes it as persons with benchmark disabilities, and number 3, every establishment should form an equal opportunity policy and it should register it with the Commissioner's office. the State Commissioner for People with Disability or the Chief Commissioner of People with Disability. Now, many of us are IT organizations, we follow global best practices, we might have equal opportunity policy already established. However, this is a specific requirement. This equal opportunity policy should contain provisions on your best practice, on what is the hiring procedure, who's the liaison officer, what is the assistive technology, if you need a reasonable accommodation like assistive technologies, how to apply for it, how do you maintain data for people. All that kind of information needs to be incorporated in that policy, and that policy needs to be registered with the Commissioner's office. There was no timeline which was provided, so hence this particular feature is already active. Many of us, if we have not registered your policies, we are already in violation. And very recently in Delhi, the Commissioner office have issued notices to 70 companies. I guess those are all government companies, but then very soon they might also start reaching out to private sector organizations. The law is very categorical as far as inclusion of private sector. The establishment word is defined as government companies and private companies. And private companies include a whole range of companies, right from a sole proprietorship to a public limited company, including factories, NGOs, cooperative societies. So everybody is kind of included, there is no exception. If there was any confusion in the 95 Act, whether law is applicable for the private sector or not, this particular law makes it very clear that it is very much applicable. Number 4, private sector companies which have more than 20 employees, are supposed to appoint a liaison officer. The liaison officer will handle duties around recruitment, providing reasonable accommodations like assistive technologies like screen readers or accessible environment. All that needs to be incorporated. Now, a liaison officer need not necessarily be a person who is full-time involved. It will be add-on responsibility, but that person needs to be identified, and while you are registering the equal opportunity policy, those information needs to be updated there. Equal opportunity policy, as I mentioned, it should be also displayed on your website, so your information of your liaison officer needs also need to be displayed, so that if there's a candidate who needs assistance or any kind of assistance for recruitment or anything, they can reach out to that particular person. So liaison officer appointment again is a must from a private sector point of view. Number 5, although the law does not have any kind of specific mandates on reservation for private sector, the law is very clear that you need to identify jobs for people with disability and include that in your equal opportunity policy. Now, identifying jobs for 21 categories of disabilities, not really the easiest of tasks. If you really look through the job identification list that the government issues, the algorithms that they follow are fairly complex. They have some codes like OL and BL and LV. It's pretty complex. I'm sure most of our organizations don't have that manual, and also it's very tough to identify jobs. We recommend that you open all your jobs for people with disabilities, take decisions on merit, match people with their skills and talent and not specifically on disabilities. You could say today I am a marketing manager and really my organization assessed me on my capability and not that I was blind. If the same job was to be identified by the government, this job would have classified as not okay for a person who's blind. So we encourage you to have an equal opportunity which is more robust and broad-based. Number 6, ensure that no person is discriminated at any point of time in your organization, and the onus of this responsibility lies at the head of the organization. The head of the organization needs to ensure that there is a non-discrimination practice, whether it is employment or even while in any part of the journey in the recruitment or any of that, if there is a complaint, the head of the department needs to explain why the discrimination was practiced, and really you need to go at length to explain that. So the law is very categorical, and something which is very heartening to see, because the PwD Act of 1995 did not have any emphasis on discrimination. Here it makes it very categorical and not providing. One very important part of this whole discrimination is that not providing reasonable accommodation, and by reasonable accommodation I mean facilities, services or technologies that people with disability require to discharge their duties, can be also amounted to discrimination. So not providing reasonable accommodation can be construed as discrimination. And the cost of reasonable accommodation, the laws and the rules make it very clear that it needs to be borne by the employer and not by the employee. Number 7, employers should provide the necessary accommodation and accessible environment. I think I touched upon this through some of our previous points, that adjustments need to be provided. These adjustments could vary, like a screen reader for a person who's blind or low vision, a magnifying software, adapted chairs or seating arrangement. It could also mean providing additional breaks, since a person who needs to inject insulin for diabetes, or somebody who needs to go for a blood transfusion, providing those kind of breaks, providing transport facilities should be provided for people with disabilities. Number 8, the law makes it mandatory to make your buildings, information communication technology, your transportation and your services to be made accessible for people with disabilities. There are timelines and standards recommended. So for instance, in cases of buildings, and buildings includes your workplaces, all existing buildings are to become accessible as per the harmonized guidelines by June of 2022, sorry. And and any new buildings ideally should not be getting an occupancy certificate if they are not accessible. Services have had a timeline of 2 years, and the timeline for that expired on June 15, 2019. Services included a whole lot of services, including digital services, web-based, app-based services, healthcare, your transportation, your banking, or any kind of services that you offer to your consumer. Those services were to become accessible by 2019 of June. So that's another compliance which is required. Similarly, ICT, when you talk about information communication technology, your websites and mobile apps, they need to follow GIGAW, which is the guidelines for Indian government websites and apps. There's also, or you can follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 to make your websites and apps accessible for people with disabilities. So clearly there are mandates for accessibility of your built environment, services, technology, transportation. 9, every establishment which has 20 or more employees are required to maintain the records of employees with disabilities. Many of us all of us now need to kind of make a record of who are the employees. A good practice to incorporate or capture data for employees with disability is through a self-identification form. This is a well-established international best practice. You need to furnish those information if a commissioner summons or asks for records for employees with disability. So you need to kind of share with that. Apart from that, you need to make sure that the data on employees with disability is well protected, and only people who need to have access to it are provided it. It's only on a very need to have basis, and not everybody gets access to that information. 10 is really about how that RPWD Act has strict penalties and punishments. These includes a monetary fine of 10,000 rupees 2 up to 5 lakh rupees, and also there will be jail if there is if companies or individuals are found in violation of the RPWD Act. So clearly a strong mandate, and these are the 10 things that the corporate needs to know about the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. It's a fairly comprehensive act and a lot that many of us need to take cognizance of. Now, moving on, when we talk about RPWD Act, and here is where I wear my social innovator hat, I wanted to showcase a solution which we've developed for people with and without disabilities. Anybody who wants to be aware or get more information on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, we have developed a chatbot, which I'm going to show you a short video, and then I'm going to move ahead and talk about the best practices at NTT data. So, Sai, if you just press the quick video, yes. So while the video is setting up, it's a chatbot. It's available on Google Assistant. It's called Mera Mitra. Mera Mitra is your friend and helps you find all information related to rights of people with disabilities in the key to empowerment. However, millions of people, information is inadequate, inaccessible, and obsolete. To bridge this information gap, we at Friends for Inclusion have built a solution introducing Mera Mitra.
And India's companion for open disability.
It uses artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing. Here you can find information on concepts related to disability.
Assistive technologies is the umbrella term used to refer to products, systems, and services used by people with disabilities to maintain and improve their functioning and independence.
Legislative framework.
Alright, Section 28 of RPWD Act talks about research and development.
Policies, schemes, and penalties.
You may ask me to tell you about the Commission for Crime Against a Disabled Person or penalties mentioned Mental Health Care Act or about
much more.
Indiranagar General Hospital is the nearest place to get your medical certificate.
Available on your favorite platform, Google Assistant, Facebook Messenger, and coming soon on WhatsApp, Twitter, and Alexa. So what are you waiting for? Talk to Mera Mitra.
Alright, let's get Mera Mitra.
Thank you. That the vision is to make it a one-stop shop for all things on disability, whether you're a disabled person or a non-disabled person. Idea is to pivot you to Mera Mitra and help you get the right information at the right time. Of course, at this stage we have information on the RPWD Act and a lot of other information like etiquette, how to interact with a person with say blindness or many other features. So you could check out Mera Mitra. If you're using Google Assistant, open it and just say talk to Mera Mitra. You don't need to install a separate app. It's available, instantly available on billion plus devices. Everybody which is powered by Google Assistant, it's available. So please do check out on that. Moving on, I would want to also talk about NTT Data, the organization that I represent, and some of the inclusive best practices that we have. Before I really talk about that, I would want to give a little disclaimer. While we are encouraged to talk about the best practices, I'm not the official spokesperson, I'm not the official DNI head, but we are encouraged. So I'm going to talk to you purely from an employee with disability, how I find inclusion at NTT Data. These are 5 major things which I found very interesting, and perhaps a lot of us can take some inspirations from on. Number 1 is representation across different organization level. Now, NTT Data, both in India and globally, have a fair amount of people with disabilities across different levels. This includes people at very senior level including SVPs, senior vice presidents, who are a person with disabilities. There are people in mid-level management and even entry-level management. Some of the contractors also hire people with disabilities and they're deployed at NTT data facilities. So really there is inclusion across all levels. It's not restricted to, say, an entry-level job. And if you really see the range of activities, since today I am a person in marketing, which often is considered as not suitable for people with vision impairment. There are people with orthopedic impairment and who are in leadership position who are extremely mobile themselves and dispel all the myths about mobility. But yes, they are growing and doing well, they're doing sales-oriented jobs. So that's something which I'm very fond of in NTT data. Number two, inclusion is just not an HR charter, but it's an organization commitment. Now, when I say this, I want to give you a couple of examples. Number one example, and it's my favorite example. So when I joined my first organization, while the organization was very well aware of my assistive technology needs, that I need a computer powered by screen-reading software called JAWS, it took about 3 months to procure that software because procurement was not included. When I joined my second organization, they got a little better. We got the softwares in a month's time. But when I joined this particular organization, the software was ready before I was joined. So that's the level of commitment, and it's something to reflect that it's just not an HR initiative, something that across organizations, different teams take ownership of. Similarly, when there is a training that happened, all that I need to say that please share the presentation in advance, and I'm a person who needs assistance, so you need to verbalize the PPTs if you're using it, and they do that fairly well. So these are some of the practices that NTT data follows and which I find very inclusive. Number three, I've been provided the necessary accommodation and flexibility. Some of the examples that I personally receive are, of course, I have the assistive technologies, JAWS and NVDA installed on my system. I also have the flexibility to work from home, so I can work as and when I require from home. Number three, I also have access to transport services that the organization has provided. So to ensure my safety, because the company had bus services available, and I said, I am okay to go to the bus, but you have to make sure that my safety is taken care. So they said, okay, we can't, obviously from any point to home with stuff. So we're going to give you a personal, we're going to ensure that you get picked up and dropped through company cabs. So yes, these are some of the accommodations that they have provided to me, and I feel that goes a great length as far as displaying the inclusive best practices. Number four, we have, the organization has been encouraging participation, and this cuts across team building exercise. Now, in the last 4 years, and these are softer aspects when we talk about disability inclusion, which often gets missed. Now, so in the last 4 years, there haven't been a single instance that there was a team activity or a lunch or any kind of an activity which was planned without taking care of the needs that I may have. So if there was a, say, agency hire for a team building exercise, they were very well primed much in advance about about my needs, or if they were made aware that there will be a person with vision impairment, and they need to ensure that the activities are inclusive where I can also equally participate. Similarly, they have encouraged me to go on site. I have been a couple of times to the US on trainings, on work-related assignments. There's been very little, apprehension as far as sending it together. Of course, they wanted me to be safe. They asked me what are my needs, and I kind of spelled it out. Okay, these are things which I may require, these are things which I may not require, and they've been very encouraging. And not only internationally but locally, even today I'm here because NTT Data has nominated me to be here, and they kind of arranged for my transport and everything else. So yes, they've kind of provided the necessary and they go at length to ensure participation in all aspects. And number 5, and again an important part that I wanted to kind of bring to all your attention is the emergency evacuation. Now in many organizations I have seen that when there is an emergency drill that happens, they do not include people with disabilities. They in fact tell them, oh, it's okay, even if you don't come down, you can be on your desk, it's just a drill. But the point is that these are the people who will be the most vulnerable if there is an emergency. Something that really I like about this organization is that they not only ensure that I participate in all the drill, but they also created a personal emergency evacuation plan. And in this plan, it's a fairly exhaustive one. I was given a personal orientation. There were L5, 5 levels of buddies assigned. So if there is somebody who's given to, 3 of them were immediately from my team and 2 outside my team. So in case there's a mishap or an emergency, all of them were to be alerted and we need to ensure that the safety of the employees is not compromised. I think that's a very good best practice that one needs to look into. And with this, I wrap up my presentation. These are the 10 mandates on RPWD Act and 5 best practices of RPWD Act, 5 best practices of NTT data. So we'll be open to taking questions a little later on. Thank you so much for taking this.